I arrived at the estate in the late afternoon, snow crunching under my boots, the air sharp and cold. The house glowed with festive lights, windows frosted at the edges, the smell of pine and fresh cookies drifting out as I stepped inside. It should have felt like home, but I already knew it would not. The rehearsal dinner was in full swing, a long table set with candles and crystal glasses. I scanned the place cards, searching for my name. That's when Patricia leaned over and moved a small card, placing it at the far end near a service tray. She did not hesitate, did not smile. "We're not your family anymore," she said, voice loud enough to carry across the room. "Your seat is with the vendors." My hands tightened on the envelope I carried in my coat pocket inside. Copies of trust documents and emails I had quietly collected over the past year. My grandfather's estate, valued at roughly $10 million, had been carefully allocated. Yet here I was, treated like an outsider in my own family. Sophie adjusted her napkin beside her, smiling politely, eyes flicking to me with a practiced indifference. Noah chuckled, leaning back in his chair, waiting to see if I would protest. Miles, the groom, appeared oblivious, engrossed in his own preparations, unaware of the tension thickening the air. I took a slow breath. Shock was the first wave. Then came calm, deliberate observation. I smiled faintly at Lena, who looked uncomfortable but said nothing. She had tried before to intervene, to give me some measure of respect. But Patricia had ruled the room like a general. The email notification on my phone lit up with a group chat message from months ago. Couldn't believe everyone made it. Everyone. Except Avery. I scrolled back, reviewing screenshots, careful to remember every slight, every exclusion. They thought I didn't notice. They thought I would remain silent. But what they did not know was that I had already preserved everything: emails, messages, recordings, every attempt to erase me from the family narrative. I folded my fingers around the envelope, letting the weight remind me that patience can be louder than shouting. The band began a soft Christmas tune. Guests laughed and toasted, unaware of the storm simmering quietly at the side of the table. I had two choices: react in anger, or observe and plan. I chose the latter. Tell me where you're watching from and hit subscribe. We need to talk about families and money. I'll explain in a moment why staying silent can be the strongest kind of revenge. The day after rehearsal dinner, the air still smelled of pine and roasting turkey, but tension had settled like frost over every surface. I returned to the estate for a casual family dinner, or so they called it. Though the atmosphere was anything but casual, Patricia sat at the head of the long oak table, pearls resting like ornaments she had placed there for effect. Sophie smiled as if the room's hostility could be neutralized with posture alone. Noah, my younger brother, lounged with the smugness of someone who had learned early that obedience earns approval. Before anyone could speak, Patricia slid a folder across the table toward me. "You are nothing without us," she said, voice calm but cutting. "Sign the deed." I looked down at the manila folder. Inside, a photocopy of the house deed, my name printed clearly as the sole owner, her thumb pressed against the top corner, leaving a faint mark. It was precise, deliberate, designed to intimidate. I did not reach for it. Instead, I placed both hands flat on the table, letting the silence stretch. Around me, polite laughter hummed like background music, a soundtrack for the power play unfolding. The roast turkey steamed in the center, untouched by anyone, as if it had been prepared for an audience rather than a meal. Glasses clinked, cousins whispered. Each smile in the room carried a weight of judgment, subtle but unmistakable. "Do not make this difficult," Patricia added, tapping the table with a fingernail. "Think of it as family property. Your grandfather would want it this way." Her words were a weapon wrapped in tradition, and everyone at the table nodded. A chorus of affirmation. I thought of every year I had returned for holidays, every flight home I had booked to see family, every gift I had sent quietly to help with bills, repairs, or tuition. All those efforts had been invisible, irrelevant, erased by the assumption that obedience equals loyalty and that distance equals betrayal. Noah leaned forward, smirking. You make everything strange. You know, moving so far away, acting like you belong somewhere else. Sophie chimed in lightly. You're like a guest at your own family table. Their words stung because they were true, yet deliberately framed as jest. Then my phone buzzed. A notification from the Family Joy Christmas group chat lit the screen a photo of Sophie and Noah at last year's engagement party, smiling beneath chandeliers. Captioned, couldn't believe everyone made it. Everyone, except Avery. I scrolled back through months of posts, each one showing celebrations from which I had been erased. Each like, each heart, each confetti emoji was a reminder that my absence had been carefully curated and celebrated. But what they did not know was that I had saved it all. Screenshots, archived emails, recordings of whispered conversations. They were evidence, meticulously organized and ready. The envelope in my pocket felt heavier with purpose than it ever had with fear. I sipped water, letting the silence fill me. Patricia expected confrontation, an outburst, something that could be framed as unreasonable or emotional. I offered none. The folder sat between us, unopened, irrelevant. Quiet observation had more power than anger could ever have in that moment. Mini twist Lena, the maid of honor, approached discreetly, leaving a small folded piece of paper near my plate. It contained a photograph from the week before, showing Sophie arguing with Patricia about seating me at a proper family table. Patricia's hand pressed flat against the chart, overriding the plea. It was subtle, almost invisible, but powerful. The exclusion had been orchestrated, deliberate, and documented. As dinner continued, the air remained tense yet brittle. Each laugh, each toast, each whispered comment was now part of the record. My patience and preparation turned what they intended as humiliation into proof. And the quiet revenge had begun without anyone realizing it. When the plates were cleared, I slipped out to the terrace. Snow fell lightly, covering the driveway in a hush of white. The family chatter continued inside, oblivious to the silent strategy taking shape. I stood alone, the envelope heavy in my coat pocket, a reminder that the truth is often more powerful than any raised voice. Tell me this: if your family pushed a folder across the table and demanded you surrender what you rightfully owned, would you sign or would you walk away? Write it down below. The morning of the Christmas wedding, the snow outside lay thick over the estate drive, softening every sound, muffling the world. Inside, the house had transformed overnight into something both magical and cruelly theatrical. Velvet runners down the aisle, crystal chandeliers, pine garlands draping the windows. The scent of fresh pine and baked goods was intoxicating. But for me, it was a reminder that I was still on the periphery. From the moment I arrived, I could feel the subtle exclusion settling around me like a physical weight. Sophie waved from across the room, her smile bright but practiced. Sorry, she said, a single word loaded with implication. This table is for successful people. She pointed to the far side of the room, near a corner where extra chairs were pushed against a wall. A buffet cart tucked in awkwardly beside them. Laughter followed her motion, polite but sharp, echoing off the high ceilings. I recognized it instantly. This was not a mistake. The place cards were arranged neatly, my name printed in small letters at that far table. In the center, a bill for $2,800 sat like a challenge, evidence of exclusion in plain sight. I muttered under my breath, "Let successful people pay for it," and allowed a faint smile to touch my lips. My expression was calm, my hands resting lightly on the chair back. But inside, The tide of humiliation churned. Patricia orchestrated the scene flawlessly, moving along the main tables, adjusting napkins, whispering instructions to the servers, all while keeping her posture perfect. She glanced at me only once, and the glance was enough sharp, measured, designed to let me know that she controlled this moment, as she had controlled so many before. Noah leaned casually against a chair, smirking, while Sophie flitted around, pretending the room's cruelty was part of the festive decor. Miles, the groom, seemed oblivious, absorbed in his own responsibilities, and Lena, my quiet ally, stood nearby, her expression tight, her hands clasped, betraying the discomfort she could not voice. I had come prepared. The envelope in my coat pocket contained screenshots of group chats, forwarded emails, and photographs from the engagement party where I had been deliberately excluded. I had recordings of whispered conversations, small interactions that proved the orchestration was deliberate. Patricia's control over the narrative was absolute, or so she thought. I sat down at the far table, keeping my posture upright, letting the clamor of polite conversation wash over me. Every laugh, every nod, every toast was cataloged in my mind. Each gesture and comment would serve later as proof, evidence of the family's pattern of exclusion. The humiliation intended for me was now doubling as documentation, each slight preserved for the quiet revenge I was orchestrating. Then Lena approached, subtly placing a folded piece of paper near my plate. I glanced at it when no one was looking. Inside was a photograph from the week prior, Sophie pleading with Patricia to include me at a family table. Patricia's hand pressed firmly against the chart, overriding the request. The proof was clear: the exclusion had not been Sophie's choice. She had tried, quietly and desperately, to intervene, only to be blocked. I remained silent as the ceremony began. The band played a soft carol that seemed almost ironic against the weight of the room. Guests lined the tables, laughter rising and falling, unaware of the storm beneath my stillness. I was invisible yet fully present, a witness to the orchestrated humiliation, and a collector of evidence that would soon shift the balance of power. The toasts began, and I sipped water slowly, letting the liquid steady my nerves. Each clink of glass reminded me that while the family controlled appearances, I controlled information. Every photograph, every message, every recording was a thread in a tapestry they could no longer manipulate. Outside, the snow continued to fall quietly, the cold seeping through the windows, a stark contrast to the warmth inside. I stood at the edge of the terrace, glancing at the illuminated estate. In the distance, I could see guests mingling, laughing, unaware that their cruelty was meticulously documented. My hands tightened around the envelope, and for the first time that morning, I felt a measure of satisfaction. Mini-hook. But what they did not know was that I had recorded the rehearsal dinner and captured screenshots of every email, every chat about seating arrangements, +1 permissions, and financial transfers, every slight, every exclusion, every whispered comment was preserved in black and white. Tell me this: if your family publicly humiliated you in front of dozens of people, while pretending it was tradition and decorum, would you speak up immediately, or wait and let evidence speak for itself? Comment, speak, or wait. Weeks passed after the wedding, but the tension did not fade. It simmered quietly, like snow melting under frost. I had returned to my apartment, my sanctuary, and spread out the archive I had meticulously collected over the past year: screenshots, group chats, emails, photographs, even recordings from the rehearsal dinner. Each file was labeled, dated, and cross-referenced. Every exclusion, every slight, every whispered instruction was accounted for. The truth was no longer hidden, it was waiting. The first step was legal. I contacted my attorney, a sharp, methodical woman who specialized in trusts and family disputes. I laid out the facts calmly: the $10 million estate, the $260,000 in transfers that had moved silently between accounts, the letters, the chats, the photographs from the engagement party, the rehearsal dinner, and the Christmas wedding. Her response was measured, almost approving. "You're not just holding evidence," she said. "You're holding leverage. This is quiet, but it is effective. No shouting. No spectacle, just proof." I thought back to Lena, who had subtly supported me. She had left me the photograph of Sophie arguing with Patricia over my seating. It had been brief, easy to dismiss, but it proved the orchestration had been deliberate. The manipulation was not an accident. Sophie had wanted me included. Patricia had refused. The betrayal had a clear source. I began drafting formal letters, precise and factual. Certified mail. Copies to family. Clear requests for account transparency. Explanations for all transfers. The letters were polite, professional, but firm. The power of the law worked quietly. The letters themselves did not scream, but they carried weight. The family reacted in predictable ways. Patricia called, voice sharp and controlled, demanding to know why I was questioning the family's decisions. I spoke evenly, not raising my voice. I explained that I was seeking clarity and transparency regarding the trust and the financial transfers. She sputtered, attempting to twist the story, but I remained calm. Every word, every pause, every measured explanation reinforced my control. Mini twist. Then Sophie reached out privately. "I never wanted this. Avery." Mom forced my hand. I tried to help, but she would not listen. I read the message 3 times. Even Sophie, who had smiled through my humiliation, had been caught in Patricia's web. The exclusion was not just deliberate. It had been enforced with precision. As the days passed, I gathered more evidence. Emails from last year's engagement party, which had seemed harmless at the time, now revealed intentional omission. Group chats, carefully archived. Prova deliberate exclusion. Whispered comments captured on recording devices highlighted orchestrated humiliation. Each file strengthened my position. At the same time, I kept my distance. I did not confront, did not raise my voice, did not give anyone the satisfaction of a scene. Instead, I prepared, waited, and let the quiet power of documentation and law accumulate. Patricia and the family, unaware, continued with their lives, believing the story had been written by their narrative, not mine. I reflected on my actions. This was not revenge in the dramatic, public sense. This was deliberate, calculated, legal, and methodical. I was reclaiming control, asserting rights that had been ignored, and protecting myself against future manipulations. Their confidence, once absolute, was now subtly shaken. Mini-hook. But what they did not know was that I had prepared copies of all correspondence for the extended family emails, chat logs, photographs, and recordings. Every manipulated decision, every whispered insult, every exclusion was ready to be presented if necessary. The narrative of silence and invisibility had finally shifted. Weeks had slipped by since I had sent the letters and presented my evidence. The family estate continued as if nothing had changed. But the atmosphere had shifted subtly. Patricia moved differently, her usual confidence now tempered by the knowledge that every action, every word, could be traced, recorded, and documented. She no longer ruled with the same casual certainty. I did not rush back into the estate or demand attention. I stayed at my apartment, letting the law and documentation do the work. My attorney requested audits of the trust, questioned the transfers totaling $260,000, and demanded explanations for decisions that had been made without my consent. Each inquiry chipped away at the carefully maintained facade. The first results arrived quietly. The transfers had been improperly documented, minor miscalculation corrected, and the remaining portion of my share clarified. Patricia had attempted to manipulate the distribution, but the evidence was undeniable. Her narrative, once unquestionable, now required explanation. Unexpected allies emerged. Lena, who had once seemed complicit in my exclusion, now offered corroborating evidence. She provided messages showing she had tried to advocate for my inclusion at the family table and in other events, only to be overruled. Sophie, too, acknowledged privately that she had been pressured by Patricia, confirming the orchestrated nature of my exclusion. The betrayal was no longer abstract, it was documented and verified. I remained calm, letting the law speak. The family meetings and communications, the letters and emails, became instruments of quiet revenge. Patricia's attempts to control the narrative no longer worked. The estate, valued at $10 million, was addressed with transparency and accuracy. Any previous transfers that had bypassed me were reversed, and my share of the trust restored. Mini twist. When the family discovered the comprehensive records, I had preserved emails, screenshots, and recordings, they were caught off guard. The same people who had laughed at my absence realized, without words, that every action had consequences. The silence was heavy, more impactful than any confrontation. I continued to manage my life independently. Flights home, holidays, and dinners were no longer obligations, they were choices. Money I had previously given quietly supporting bills, mortgages, and tuition was reclaimed, no longer automatically sent. My presence in family affairs was no longer a requirement to maintain the appearance of harmony. The documentation remained, a quiet but powerful safeguard. Emails, screenshots, recordings, all meticulously stored, ensuring that future attempts to manipulate the narrative could not succeed. The family's previous authority over my story had been replaced by objective proof. As winter deepened, I reflected on the lessons I had learned. Family loyalty often comes with conditions unspoken. And freedom is not the absence of conflict, but the mastery of one's own choices and responses. I could engage with relatives who respected me, ignore those who did not, and maintain a life undisturbed by arbitrary judgments. Mini Hook, the quiet power of documentation and patient observation, had achieved what confrontation could not. Every exclusion, every slight, and every manipulation had been accounted for. The narrative they had tried to control was now firmly in my hands. Would you rather confront your family loudly, or enforce your rights quietly through documentation and law? Comment quiet or loud. Months passed, and the family gatherings became less frequent. The estate, once a battleground of subtle manipulations and quiet exclusions, was now settled according to the original terms of the trust. $10 million had been divided fairly, all transfers accounted for, and any questionable movement reversed. Patricia's authority, once absolute, had been quietly undermined without my raising a voice or creating a scene. I no longer attended the Sunday dinners, the holiday feasts, or any event where my presence was conditional on someone else's whim. I did not answer calls from relatives who had treated me as a guest in my own life. Instead, I focused on my apartment, my routines, and the life I had built carefully over the years. Every corner of my home, the balcony overlooking the city, the desk stacked with correspondence, the small reading nook by the window was mine. Free of interference, free of judgment. Sophie reached out again after several weeks. Her message was longer, more reflective. I hope one day you can forgive me. Mom pressured me, and I couldn't stand up to her. I see now what happened, and I'm truly sorry. I read it carefully. Forgiveness was not required. Acknowledgement was sufficient. She could regret the past, but reconciliation was optional. I thought about Lena, my quiet ally. Her subtle interventions had helped preserve fairness, even if she had remained in the background. Sometimes, the people who appear complicit are quietly working behind the scenes, ensuring truth has a chance to surface. The satisfaction I felt was not rooted in anger or vengeance. It was the relief of reclaiming my own narrative, of existing without manipulation. I had been erased, humiliated, and excluded, but I had emerged intact, autonomous, dignified, and untouchable in the ways that mattered most. Eventually, the extended family became aware of the truth. The emails, screenshots, and recordings were selectively shared not as a threat, but as factual accounts. Silence, the most powerful form of influence, had become my instrument. Those who had treated me as inconsequential could no longer ignore the facts. My holidays were now different. Instead of attempting to fit into a household that had never fully welcomed me, I traveled, spent time with friends, and celebrated quietly but meaningfully. I discovered an unexpected freedom in absence, in the ability to set boundaries and enforce them without guilt. Financial independence reinforced emotional freedom. The house, my assets, my savings, all untouched by the whims of those who had tried to control me, served as a buffer and a reminder of what diligence and patience can achieve. No one could coerce me, manipulate me, or diminish my accomplishments any longer. I allowed myself to reflect on the lessons learned. Family dynamics are complex, and loyalty often comes with unspoken conditions. True freedom is not the absence of conflict, but the mastery of one's own choices and reactions. I could engage with relatives who respected me, ignore those who did not, and maintain a life that could not be shaken by arbitrary judgment. Mini Hook resolved. The patient, methodical strategy had reached its conclusion. The truth was no longer hidden. The manipulations, the exclusions, and the lies could not undo the careful records I had kept, nor diminish the life I had built beyond their reach. That evening, I lit a candle on my balcony, watching city lights blur into the winter haze. No one knew my satisfaction. No one witnessed the quiet justice that had been served. It was mine alone, and that was more than enough. The family had learned, indirectly, that every action has consequences. My dignity was restored not through confrontation, but through patience, preparation, and quiet assertion of my rights. Freedom is not a reward from others, it is a claim you make for yourself. If you think the main character made the right choice, comment right. If you have a better way, share your idea. Story 2. My brother's wife called me trash, so he punched me and cut me off for 9 years. They arrived at my mansion by the sea yesterday and announced that we would be moving in. I simply locked the gate and grinned. Hi there. I'm Kyle. I was punched in the face 9 years ago by my own brother, who then looked me in the eye and said, "Trash like you don't belong in my life." Together with the woman who had tainted our relationship, he turned away. No birthdays, no calls, nothing but kiet. Fast forward now. I started from nothing, rose to the position of CEO, and purchased a mansion on the beach. And guess who arrived the following morning? Grinning and carrying suitcases. Hello, young man. Have space for your family. They assumed I would forget. They assumed I would fold. But what I did after that, they didn't anticipate it. It smelled of too much fake politeness and charcoal beer. The Sunday night in Charleston, South Carolina, was warm. The usual suspects were all over my brother Caleb's backyard, cousins catching up, uncles inebriated on light beer, someone grilling ribs and acting like they knew what they were doing. I pretended not to want to be there, nodding, smiling, and holding a plastic cup off to the side. However, I continued to attend each year in the hopes that things would be different this time and that perhaps they would no longer treat me like a leftover. Venus, my sister-in-law, was grinning artificially as usual. like a southern debutante who became a queen bee. She drifted from one group to another. She exuded a sense of ownership over her family. And the depressing aspect, she was not mistaken. She said too loudly, "Kale, sweetie," as she put her manicured hand on my shoulder in a charitable gesture. It must be pleasant to be in between jobs. That hit like a slap. All that free time. Some of the neighbors laughed. Nervous. Soft. However, enough to cause pain. Caleb remained silent. He simply swigged his beer again. The lawn was staring at him, as if it were owed something. "I'm actually freelancing now," I said, maintaining a steady tone. "It is adaptable. Pays well." Venus's head cocked. "Living off the labor of others is a nice way to describe being flexible. Do you not think something broke inside of me? And only a bit." However, I didn't answer. Not just yet. At last, Caleb said something. "Kale. She has a point. When there's free food and friendly company, you're always there. But you ignore us the rest of the year. Ghost." It was me who made the call. The person who arrived to assist Dad in repairing the deck. The person who gave Caleb his money back when he and Venus's mortgage was in arrears. I took a deep breath. I said I never asked for anything. "Come on. Please." Venus added her voice. "What a martyr it is to say that. Simply accept it. You float. You arrive without anything. You're still learning at the age of 37. The family is worn out. The family." As if I didn't belong. I took a look around. Nobody raised their voice. Not Aunt May, whom I once picked up from the hospital after a 2-hour drive. I fixed Uncle Brant's lawnmower last summer. But not him. All of them gazed into their drinks. Then I noticed my mother sitting quietly on the porch with a small object in her hand. She glanced at me, then averted her gaze. Her face was unreadable, as if she didn't want to be involved but also didn't want to intervene. My chest constricted. I was about to say something when I turned back to Venus. Anything. Caleb, however, moved in between us. He had glassy eyes. He spoke too loudly. "Do you believe that you are superior to us, do you not?" He always acted like a depressed poet when he spat. However, "Kyle, you are nothing. You have never been anything." There was a thick silence. "Do you truly think this about me? Despite myself?" My voice cracked as I asked. Caleb took a step forward. "I don't need trash like you in my life." Then he struck my jaw quickly and forcefully with his fist. My cup went flying. My knees gave way. I fell to the floor. For a moment, nobody moved. I could only hear my own heart thumping like a wardrobe and the cicadas buzzing. My mouth was filled with blood. Dazed, I slowly sat up and saw my mother once more. She was still on the porch. Still not moving. Still not speaking. But in her hand was the object I'd seen earlier. A pocket watch. Dad's old one. Cracked. The minute hand stuck between 2 numbers. She stood up, walked toward me, and without a word placed it in my palm. Then turned her back and walked away. It didn't feel like love. It was a sense of closure. I refrained from crying. I didn't defend myself. Shaking and bleeding, I got up and started to walk. Outside the backyard. 2. Out of the family. Not just out of that house. I didn't see any of them again for 9 years. They only came because I had something they wanted. Even then, and bid farewell. With blood in my mouth and silence behind me, I made my way directly to my car. Nobody chased after me. Outside a 24-hour CVS, I slept in my truck that night under a flickering light that buzzed like a bad memory. Until morning arrived and the chill in my chest began to feel permanent. I gazed through the windshield. I packed 2 duffel bags and departed Charleston permanently 3 weeks later. The plan was not to go to Houston. It was the first place I came across that offered low rent and a Craigslist ad for warehouse assistants. I accepted it. Slept in a tiny studio on a mattress on the floor. to open the refrigerator. I had to move the trash can. The point was that no one knew me there. I kept my family to myself for the first 2 years. Not once. Not to colleagues. Not to the neighbor who was always checking on me. I tried not to think about birthdays, Thanksgivings, or Christmas lights. Kept my head down and worked every extra shift they offered. However, things can only be buried so deeply. On my birthday in the 3rd year, I ended up in the air. Century. I passed out from heat stroke and dehydration after spending the entire afternoon loading trucks in the sun. The nurse asked if someone was coming to get me when I woke up, and I replied that nobody was. I promised to call someone, but I never did. With a prescription in one pocket and a therapy referral in the other, I made my way home from that hospital. It also never failed. I wasn't yet upset. Say hello? Later on, that happened. By the 5th year, the silence was more than just unpleasant. It became intimate. Caleb never made contact. Not even after I relocated. Not even after I mentioned that I was in the hospital on Facebook once. Only one. As if from a complete stranger. I wrote the letter at that time. I didn't write in order to debate. That night, I didn't write to rehash. All I said was that I missed him. I hoped we could have a conversation. Perhaps not immediately. Perhaps not in person. Simply something. I sent it to his Charleston address. No address for return. Only his name. I didn't receive a response for 3 weeks. But the handwriting on the envelope wasn't Caleb's. Venus was the planet. There was a typed letter inside. Chilly. Accurate. Clinical. Kale was the first ingredient. It's exhausting that you can't accept responsibility for the suffering you've caused this family. She discussed my tendency to be a victim, how I emotionally drained others, and how Caleb had moved on. There was a line that I can still recall exactly. You were never disconnected. The repercussions of your own selfishness were simply too much for you to bear. I went back and read it a 3rd time. At the base, no Caleb's signature, only hers. She had caught it. My letter was never seen by him. I realized then that I could scream into the emptiness indefinitely. I had no one coming to get me. For hours, I gazed at that letter, at the way she presented it all, as if I were a parasite that was eventually eradicated. I made an effort to convince myself that perhaps she was shielding him, and that perhaps he wasn't interested enough to inquire. But I knew in my heart. That evening, I tore the letter to pieces while standing on the 5th floor balcony of my apartment, which faced the parking lot of a grocery store, as if they had never been written. Let them fly apart in the wind. After that, I returned inside, turned on my laptop, and began searching for classes, bookkeeping, enterprise. I knew one thing, but I had no idea what I was going to do. I had had enough of waiting for approval to get better. Silence was what they desired. They would get it, but not in the manner they had anticipated. Because peace isn't always implied by silence. Permission is sometimes implied. Authorization to construct something without their presence. Authorization to develop without their consent. Permission to use every bit of that suffering as fuel. I therefore stopped waiting and asking questions. And I made the decision to at least be strong if I was going to be by myself. I kept it a secret. I didn't purchase a journal with the word hustle on the cover or share a quote on social media. The day after I ripped up Venus's letter, I started working. Someone gave me an old laptop for $20, which I opened. It turned on, but it wheezed louder than my apartment's air conditioner. That was sufficient. I began watching YouTube videos about Python, JavaScript, coding, and anything else that seemed difficult enough to turn off most people. Then, again and again. I began at the beginning. I initially failed all of the exercises, unable to get a button to function as intended. I was frustrated, but I didn't understand how loops worked. Compared to the silence, it felt better. Up until 3 in the morning, I would load trucks at the shipping yard, After a few hours of rest, wake up and immediately return to the screen. I had no plans for the weekend. Nah, girlfriend. And no outside distractions. You'll never be able to build anything on your own, she said in the back of my mind, like a shadow. That voice followed me. I heard it every time I wanted to give up. I muttered, "Take that, Venus." When I eventually managed to get my first Hello World program to launch, after 2 years, I had constructed a respectable structure. A straightforward inventory run scheduling app designed for small warehouses like the one where I worked. I presented it to my supervisor. "Did you build this yourself?" he asked, blinking at the screen and rubbing his beard. "That word on your own," I gave a nod. "Some guy in it, his brother-in-law, sent it to a local logistics software company a week later. They requested a meeting. I was anxious and perspiring through my undershirt when I arrived wearing a blazer from a thrift store. The man who interviewed me appeared to have been sleep-deprived for 3 days. After silently scrolling through my demos, he turned to face me and remarked, "You're rough, but you're real. That's something we can work with." For the first time in my adult life, I was called valuable by someone other than the grocery store cashier. I was hired. Shot base pay at junior levels. But I didn't give a damn. I recall whispering while sitting in that cheap car in their parking lot and holding onto the steering wheel with both hands. "Man, you succeeded. You succeeded." They promoted me to full-time after 6 months. I ceased loading trucks. I purchased an actual desk. My last payday loan was paid off. I have yet to give my brother a call. The void is not filled by success. It simply alters its form. My employer sent me to a tech conference in Austin the following spring. I nearly skipped it. There wasn't a single button-down shirt I owned that wasn't stained. However, according to my manager, it's good exposure. Give a few hands a shake. Consume the complimentary food. So I went. It felt like entering a different planet when you were walking the floor. People with fancy titles and well-maintained booths. Business cards are being distributed like candy by youthful CEOs. Then, without warning, my name was called. Kyle, half expecting it to be an error. I turned around. No, it wasn't. Dante Marshall was the one. We had attended the same high school. He would frequently ask me to fix his login while he sat behind me in the computer lab. It had been nearly 15 years since I last saw him. "Don't." Blinking, I said, "Look at you. Man." He smiled. "Take a look at yourself. I never imagined seeing you in such a setting." In order to avoid the noise, we decided to get coffee in the venue's corner. As it happened, Dante had invested in venture capital. He was looking for talent for a new project with an AI focus and had co-founded a few startups. We spent an hour talking. I briefly explained the firm and my app to him. "Not all of it. Enough. You know, I always thought you were too smart to be stuck in that town back in high school," he said, leaning in. I grinned but remained silent. "We're building something," he added. "It's still early. We need someone who is both pain-aware and knowledgeable about code. Not just algorithms, but real-world stuff." I sat up at that. He said, "Look, I have guys with MBAs lined up for this, but they have never slept in their car or been punched in the face by their own family. Indeed. You have. You'll think differently as a result." That was more devastating to me than any job offer could ever be. He hesitated. Though, I promised to give it some thought that evening. Sitting in the dark at the hotel, I reflected on everything that had happened to me. Concerning Charleston. Concerning Caleb. Regarding the punch. Concerning Venus and her icy letter. Nothing can ever be built by you alone. My laptop's screen was blank when I opened it. I then began to type out a plan. My assistant gently knocked and slid her phone in front of me while I was on the phone pitching our new feature to a group of Singaporean investors. Only a name appears on the screen. The Chloe Jacobs podcast is scheduled to air at 2:00 p.m. I nodded and continued. But I heard that click in the back of my mind. That tiny moment in life when things change and you don't notice it right away. It was intended to be a light interview, an informal discussion about the creation of an AI logistics tool in a one-bedroom apartment by a former warehouse worker. However, she posed the question, do you ever wish your family had been more involved in your rise, somewhere between the fourth and fifth questions? I hesitated and considered omitting it. But my throat constricted and the result wasn't what I had in mind. Family isn't. I used to say, who brought you up? It's who held you in high regard. She blinked, made a note in her notebook, and continued. The following morning, my inbox blew up. When the internet smells something raw, it moves so quickly that I had forgotten. It became merchandise after being clipped, shared, and featured on Reels quoted on TikTok. A screenshot of a mug with the words "respect is thicker than blood" was even sent to me. Kale. Terrell. It seemed unreal. Now I woke up to a view of the San Diego coastline from my high-rise apartment. Smart lighting and marble worktops. I used to believe that everything was only seen on television. And still, I cook the same way most nights. Toast and eggs were consumed standing at the stove, just as I used to do when the power went out. I hadn't changed because of money, but new sound. I was sharper in silence. I didn't go out to parties. I didn't show anything off. Quietly. I was satisfied, observing an increase in numbers, obtaining client feedback, observing staff members' faith in the product I created. Then it took place. A late Tuesday night. I just finished going over the product team's updates. I filled a glass with water. Once, my phone buzzed. Unknown figure. Prior to seeing the message, I was going to disregard it. Lately, your brother has been struggling. No name. No greeting. No background. I simply hovered my thumb over it while I stared at it. 9 years. Not even a "how are you?" Not a card. Not a call. I checked the number out of state area code after seeing that there was nothing else in the thread after scrolling up. Not preserved. However, I was aware of the formal, clipped language and the icy warmth of the typing. My mom was the one. I took a seat. The heart is sinking like a stone. Not racing. Falling into deep water. I didn't respond. Rather, I placed the phone face down on the table, went outside onto the balcony, and let the wind gently pat my face. Below, the city lights flickered. Somewhere in the distance, most likely, someone was dancing, laughing, and living weightlessly. I was unable to determine whether the message was worried, bait or guilt. That's what made me nod. What are they seeking? Was Caleb going to die, feeling down, not having any money, or did they simply decide it was time to bring me back in after noticing how popular my name was? I wanted to laugh. A part of me wanted to scream. It felt louder than anything I had ever heard. But for the most part, I just stood there and let the silence grow. Because it doesn't whisper when the silence finally breaks. It reverberates. I spent a lot of time training myself to ignore the boy in me that used to admire Caleb and cling to everything he said for my mother, who only wanted them to be proud. However, I came to a realization that I didn't want to share at the time. I still desired it. I was still curious. They noticed me. As a brother and a son. Not just on a screen or when I was helpful. I asked myself aloud in a voice I hardly recognized while sitting on the balcony's edge, with my elbows resting on my knees and gazing out at the ocean. Am I still the child who merely desired their love and only 10 words after I hit sin? No warmth. No punctuation. I put the phone away and carried on with my day as if nothing had changed. However, that night there was something. I didn't get much sleep. Not out of regret. Only friction. Something wasn't quite right. Similar to a window that is left open during a storm. It was done. I told myself. One response. That's all. No forgiveness was given. No door opened. Then there was a knock 3 days later. I was brewing coffee in the kitchen. The tile was streaked with sharp lines by the early afternoon sun. I had no expectations. The majority of people had to pass through the front door, the elevator code, and the doorman, my workstation. Getting up here was difficult for whoever it was. They were there when I opened the door. Venus and Caleb, standing as if they were at home. He smiled as if we had only met the previous weekend. With his arms spread like a joke, he said, "Little bro, are you going to abandon me?" I remained motionless. Venus moved ahead of him, polished and with a bright eye. I remembered the same shade of lipstick from 9 years ago. Kale, whoa, you've accomplished a great deal. This location is breathtaking. I kept quiet, allowing the silence to elongate like barbed wire between us. They awaited an invitation to enter. I didn't provide one. Caleb, always, as if he owned the place. The performer simply laughed and walked by me. Venus tapped lightly on the floor as she followed heels. I took longer than I should have to close the door. He circled the wide-open living room. Everyone is watching. Windows, furnishings, the artwork. I hardly noticed anymore. This perspective. Shaking his head, he said, "Who would have guessed?" Man, I didn't respond. I leaned on the counter in the kitchen, crossed arms. "Why are you here?" As usual. Venus took the lead. We were nearby. A little change of scenery was needed. Decided it was time for us to visit. "Well, it's been too long," I inquired. Caleb pivoted. "Man, hurry up. Don't act that way. Families. Family." It nearly made me laugh. Nearly. He took a seat on the couch as if it were his own. As if he had never touched me. As if he hadn't left after seeing me bleed on the sidewalk. It was growing inside my chest. That gradual ascent. Not anger. Not just yet. Only pressure. Perched on the armrest was Venus. All elegance and planning. "Recently, things have been a little tight on our end," she said, pausing. "Nothing noteworthy. You are aware of the state of the economy." I didn't answer. Her earrings swayed as I watched her lips move. She grinned. "In any case," we thought, "you have this large area. Much more than one individual requires. For a few weeks, all we need is a place to crash. Nothing long-term. Just a gentle landing spot. A calculated family pause." Once more. That word. I gazed at him and then at her. Caleb put his elbows on his knees and leaned forward. "Look. We're blood. But I know we've had history. There must be some significance to that. And that's it." It was as clear as glass to me. They did not come to offer an apology. They came not to catch up. They needed something. So they came. I was only ever that to them. A contingency plan. There was a picture on the hallway shelf behind them. I kept the old family barbecue going. Prior to the stroke, Caleb had thrown it once and referred to it as garbage. Along with my dad. I kept it, even though I discovered it cracked in a box. I intentionally left the frame broken and never fixed it. I went over and picked it up now. They observed me. "Do you recall this?" I inquired. Caleb grinned. "Yes. Fun times." I gave a nod. "You tossed it aside, claimed it was garbage." He moved. "Did I? I can't recall that." "Naturally. It didn't." Venus cleared her throat. "We're not attempting to cause trouble. All we're attempting to do is go forward together." I turned around after putting the picture back face down this time. "I need some time to consider it," I said. "Naturally." Venus stood. "I completely understand. Kyle. Only a few weeks. There is no pressure." Caleb patted my shoulder lightly as he made his way to the door. "Man, it's nice to see you." Really, I didn't nod or flinch. Didn't bid farewell. I simply stood with their back to the wood. Locked the door. And shut it behind them. though quieter and colder. The apartment didn't feel deserted. They had gone to great lengths to deny the past ever occurred. To request a portion of the gift they were never involved in creating. No responsibility. No apology. Merely an expectation. I already knew the answer when I glanced out the window to the street below where their Uber was waiting. Inset. Although I already knew the answer, I told them I would give it some thought. I enjoyed a drink and the waves while sitting on the balcony that evening. Today, I let the cool breeze remind me of my real family. All of this was created by me. Brick by brick. I knew absolutely no one. That should be the end of it, I thought. However, when I opened the front door a little after 10 the following morning, I discovered a pile of boxes. Caleb and Venus were right behind it, grinning as if they were early for a party I had never invited them to. With a bag slung over his shoulder, Caleb said, "I hope it's okay." We reasoned that it would be simpler to simply settle in. "You mentioned that you were considering it." Venus then raised a towel-wrapped, medium-sized appliance. "Where is the air fryer to be placed?" I didn't say anything. Not immediately, because I needed the quiet to contain the feelings that were rising inside of me. They always grunted as they passed, dropping his duffel just inside the door, but they took that silence as permission. Venus came next and placed the air fryer as if it were supposed to be on my kitchen counter. Like a real estate agent. She looked around. "This place feels very much like you. Very little. Sharp. Incredibly tidy." With my hand still on the doorknob, I stood at the threshold. For a brief moment, I foolishly believed that this was all a test. That they would turn around, laugh, say they were joking, and walk away. Instead, Venus asked which room has the best morning light after opening a box and taking out a throw pillow. Caleb experiences headaches. They had dispersed into 2 guest rooms by the afternoon. On the sink, she was wearing makeup. His socks are in the washing machine. Slowly, my house is no longer mine. It resembled the growth of mildew. They made contact with objects they shouldn't have. Without asking, I moved the throw blankets, changed the thermostat, and placed the grocery bags on the island. Venus then commented, "You know some real food wouldn't kill you." After glancing at my protein shake during lunch, "You're still on your clean fuel kick." She was hilarious. And Caleb laughed. I ate by myself on the balcony that night. The company wasn't necessary for me. The air was what I needed. None of this felt like a coincidence. And I needed time to reflect. There was no crash. They were settling in. Venus, dressed in one of my hoodies, was in the kitchen the following morning, stirring coffee as if she owned the pot. "Good morning," she brightly said. I opened the refrigerator. I found one of my food prep containers open, half-eaten, and unmarked. Caleb scratched his stomach as he entered shirtless. "That bed is firm but good. Man, days could pass while I slept. I would prefer that you didn't," I whispered. He either pretended not to hear me or didn't. Like fog. They settled. Always present, but impossible to grasp. My patience was as thin as paper by the 3rd day. I adhered strictly to my routine. I kept the door closed while I worked on my study. I didn't say goodbye before heading to the gym. I barely acknowledged the 2 ghosts that now haunted my space as I ate in silence. Then dinner arrived. Around the kitchen island, we were seated. I didn't know why, but I had ordered enough Thai food for 3. Venus said, as if speaking to herself. After pushing a piece of tofu around her plate, some people lose sight of the people who raised them and who kept the lights on while they were too preoccupied with their dreams. I stopped at midnight and raised my head. Her gaze remained fixed on her meal. I grinned and inhaled. Next. Tight. "Well," I said softly, "not everyone forgets. But some mistake silence for consent." She looked directly into my eyes. Then she twitched her smile. Caleb remained silent. Pretending not to notice the tension between us growing like wet cement, he simply continued chewing. Before bed stopped outside the room where they slept that night, I took a stroll down the hallway. Lights were still on when the door cracked open. Caleb had said something that made Venus laugh softly, and I could hear it, as if it were a vacation. After passing the bookshelf and continuing down the hall, I paused once more at the framed picture. Still Mina. Still cracked. I stood looking at it for a long time. It dawned on me then. They weren't related. They were occupying a space. I would also show them out on my terms if they refused to go on their own. To make sure this was mine, I looked at my house's deed the following day. Each and every inch. I then printed a guest agreement in 2 copies. On the kitchen island, sat, waited. Around noon, they arrived. Venus was on her phone, and Caleb was yawning. "Good morning," she said, as if we shared a room, as if the past had never occurred. I moved the papers over the counter, remained silent, picking one up. Caleb raised an eyebrow. "What is this?" He tried to laugh as he asked, but there was a hint of familiarity in his voice. I spoke in a flat tone. "Your visitors. What that means is described here." Venus looked up. Her smile wavered. Caleb quickly glanced at the first page. "Hey. Bro. Hurry up." Really legal documents. I didn't answer. Simply looked him in the eyes. Waited. He turned the page to the second one. "Has a lawyer written this for you?" "Yes." I did. Venus picked up the second copy and strolled around the island. Her silence was a little too drawn out. No property changes. No visitors without authorization. Homeowners continue to have discretion over shared areas. Reading it made her taste something sour. Maximum duration, 30 days. She put it down firmly. "Whoa," she whispered. "Do you truly believe that this makes you, what, superior to us?" "No. It clarifies me," I said. Caleb laughed and shook his head. "Man, this is cold." I gazed at him and allowed the silence to grow. "It has nothing to do with cold," I said. "Respect is at issue." Venus folded her arms and leaned in. She had a sharper voice now. "You walk around like a self-made king, but you can't even recall who paid for your bus fare when you were broke or who fed you when you were 15. It's not a favor because I remember everything I said. It's a line." Caleb made an effort to diffuse it. "We are related. Families don't act in this manner. No family moves into your home without your permission." There was no comeback for him. "Venus. However," she broke. "You believe you are now superior to us," she gave a hiss. "You have no idea how much he has done for this family." Caleb quickly turned his head. "Don't." "Venus." She had already left. "No," she let out a bark. "He seeks the truth. Give it to him. Please." Then she broke off. Sharp as broken. Tile with glass. Kale. He lost our house. Everything. The room became silent. It appeared as though Caleb had been punched out of his lungs. Venus continued. "Bitter. Right now, deconstructing. Blackjack. Wagers on sports. Loans." I pleaded with him to stop. But it was in vain. As if the next hand would fix it. He continued to chase it. She gestured up at the ceiling. "We are here for that reason. Not because you were missed. Since there was nowhere else for us to go." It wasn't denied by Caleb. He simply stood and gazed. As I reclined in my chair, I sensed a change within. Not pity. Not rage. I didn't feel like the little brother tidying up someone else's mess for the first time in years. I felt grounded and solid. Venus dabbed at her eyes. She wasn't in tears. Not at all. Cornered. "Do you want your priceless little paper signed by us?" She lost her temper. "All right." She grabbed a pen off the counter, wrote her name on the underside, and pushed it in Caleb's direction. He paused. However, he signed. It wasn't his desire, since he had no other option. I got up and went to the bookshelf after they left the kitchen. Pushing aside a pile of tech magazines, the picture remained, still visible, still cracked. It wasn't fixed by me. I simply created room next to it. Place the signed documents directly beside it. Allow them to sit together. A boundary is established and the past is broken. They also signed it. However, the expression in their eyes conveyed a different message. It's not over yet. And I think they're real. It was 3 days later. Keep quiet. Tense. You know? They stayed out of sight. Remained sufficiently courteous most of the time. But every action seemed staged. In an attempt to appear more laid back, Venus began wearing more makeup around the house and whistled as he passed my office. They prepared food. A large dinner one evening, claimed to be attempting to put things right. I kept my hands off the food. Thunder rolled in off the coast later that evening. Through the gaps between the window panes, the wind howled, causing the glass to tremble just enough to give the impression that everything might collapse. Approximately 2:40 a.m. My phone was buzzing when I woke up. I initially believed it to be an emergency alert. Is there a weather warning, perhaps? Not that it was worse. Though, numerous alerts, missed emails, texts, and phone calls. Then the messages began to arrive more quickly than I could read them. Man, what's going on? Is this authentic? You shouted at a woman in that video. It's popular. Kale, are you all right? I watched the screen and blinked. The words were nonsensical. I then watched the video. It was choppy. Poor lighting. Of course, from security video. My personal security video. In the clip, they used my own cameras. In the kitchen, I was standing, arms raised, mid-explanation, not in rage, speaking firmly, indeed, but without shouting. However, it sounded like I was screaming in the edit. An audio recording of a woman sobbing would be cut. Not actually crying. Looped. False. Just enough to establish the mood. It was a Venus-like voice. Her face was even blurred, as if it were from a crime documentary on television. Billionaire tech founder caught on camera in domestic dispute. The caption read, "The video reached 2 million views by 3:15 a.m. I felt cold. I sat motionless for a while. I'm holding the phone. The mind is blank. Not anger. Do not panic. Only the gradual realization. It was this. The play. The front door was closed off to them. They were now attempting to set the house on fire. However, they were unaware. They never stopped to think about the fact that I had gained some knowledge following last year's break-in at my workplace. Although paranoia can be unattractive, it can also be intelligent. I stood up and walked across the house in the dark. The sound of my footsteps was muffled by the storm outside. Venus and Caleb remained asleep. I didn't check their room out. I went into my study instead. A black hard drive's drawer was opened. Tiny. Not marked. I connected it to my desktop computer. All of the video was there. Tidy. Uncut. Uncooked. Each and every room. Every single word. The original sound recording. No yelling. No sobbing. Just a weary man establishing limits in his own house. Then I discovered it. A week earlier. The visitor's room. Venus is pacing. Slumping in the corner was Caleb. She spoke sharply. Nobody will notice if we cut it correctly. It's not real. All we need is for him to appear irate. That's all. Caleb. He is going to sue us. Venus. He's too lenient. He refuses to retaliate. I kept the video. Timestamps were added to each file. By 5 in the morning, I then gave my lawyer a call. My publicist, media contacts, and legal teams had all received the originals. At 6:30 a.m., The headlines began to change. False allegations of abuse backfire. Security footage is provided by Bain. An attempt at extortion was captured on video. The comments began to pour in. They attempted to destroy him. He was clever. Always keep a record. Always keep yourself safe. Those who are quiet and don't flinch deserve respect. Caleb and Venus were still in their room at 9 in the morning. I didn't knock. Instead, I watched the surf pound the shoreline while sipping coffee in the living room. Once more, my phone buzzed. I recognized the text. Even though the number was unknown, only a single line. We had no intention of it getting this far. I didn't respond. Making a mistake is not the same as intentionally drawing blood. You can't go back to the breakfast table when someone tries to take away your job, your reputation, and your dignity. Sorry. I got up and went back past the picture frame and into the hallway. Still there. Still cracked. Left on purpose. Like a scar that isn't necessary to cover. Only recognition. I didn't touch it. Suddenly, their apathy was overshadowed by their silence. And the house wasn't filled with noise once the dust had settled. It was much heavier. Keep quiet. Not the painful kind. Not waiting in silence. This was not like the others. This was it. Venus and Caleb didn't bid each other farewell. Not a word. No call. Simply gone. When I made coffee one morning as usual after waking up, I saw that their door was open. They stripped the bed. Halfway out. A couple of drawers remain. Everything was gone except for the air fryer. On the counter. They even left a partially used bottle of Venus's perfume. The artificially sweet smell persisted a bit too long. The gossip blogs had already moved on by midday. They stopped posting on social media. Caleb's profile disappeared entirely. Venus posted something dramatic. 2 days later. A photo of a stormy sky. Captioned with "Family is messy, but love remains." I didn't react. Didn't repost. Didn't text. There was nothing left to salvage. I went for a walk that afternoon. Down the hill past the mailboxes. Just to feel the breeze. When I got back, the house looked different. Not because anything had changed, but because something in me had. I walked the hallway slowly, fingertips brushing the wall. The house was still too big for one man, but it didn't feel empty anymore. Just peaceful. In the foyer, that same cracked photo frame still hung where it always had. I paused in front of it. The glass was still split. A diagonal scar right across my younger self's face. The crack caught the light just enough to shine. I could have fixed it months ago. But I didn't. And I still wouldn't. It stays that night. I opened an envelope that had been sitting on my desk for weeks. I'd avoided it. Kept pushing it aside. It was confirmation that the grant I'd submitted in Mom's name had been approved. 100,000. 000 to a local literacy program for single mothers trying to earn their JEDs. She would have liked that. She used to say, "Don't just grow money. Grow something that grows people." I sat with that for a while. Read the letter twice. Folded it back neatly. And placed it next to the photo. Later that week, I hosted dinner. Just a small thing. Nothing fancy. 6 people around my dining table. Passing roasted vegetables. Pouring wine. Laughing too loud. There was Mark, the intern I once mentored who now runs his own nonprofit. He told a story mid-meal. Something I'd long forgotten. "You remember that time I was going to quit. Right after my dad passed," he said, setting his fork down. "I walked into your office thinking I was going to be fired. Instead, you gave me 2 weeks paid and told me to go get right with myself." I looked at him. He smiled. That saved me. Man. Serious sleep. The table went quiet for a second. Then someone changed the subject. And something about politics or some movie remake. But I wasn't in the room anymore. I was somewhere deeper. Because in that moment, it hit me. This was the family I chose, not tied by blood, but by presence, by loyalty, by showing up. It was enough. After dinner, people lingered, refilled glasses, argued over old music, swapped chairs. When they finally trickled out around midnight, I walked them to the door one by one. I cleaned up slowly. No rush. Then I poured myself one last glass of wine, turned off the kitchen lights and stood at the front window. Outside, the ocean was restless but not angry. The tide crashed in soft, steady rhythm, almost like breathing. I stood there a while. The house behind me didn't feel like a fortress anymore. It felt like a place I had earned, brick by brick, scar by scar. I sipped the wine and whispered, not to anyone, just to the air in front of me. They thought they could break me, but they only helped me build walls. They'll never cross again. I glanced once more toward the hallway where the photo hung. Crooked glass cracked, memory unedited. Then I turned away from it and walked back into the quiet. Some endings don't need noise. Just the sound of a door finally closing and staying closed. Thanks for watching. Take care. Good luck.